Algeria has had a challenging history with transfers of power. In the 62 years that have passed since the country's independence from France, change in leadership has come more often than not through the military. The country's current president, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, was elected 5 years ago after weeks of popular protests against the country's establishment forced his predecessor to resign. He was elected amid a record-low turnout. On Saturday, Algeria will go to the polls again, and this time around, the election is expected to be contentious, to say the least. 3 candidates are vying for what could be a trajectory-changing term for Algeria. They are the incumbent, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, returning to the ticket after rising to his first term following the 2019 Hirak protest movement; Youcef Aouchiche, a former member of parliament running with the Socialist Forces Front; and Abdelaali Hassani Cherif, a civil engineer running on promises of socio-economic stability with the Movement of Society for Peace. Algeria is seeking a main-stage role in regional politics as instability between neighbors expands and intensifies, and voters are apathetic towards the races. What can these candidates provide? What's setting them apart? Welcome to the Year of Elections, a podcast series brought to you by the Opinion Desk at The National. I'm Sulaiman Hakimi, The National's opinion editor, speaking to you from our studio here in Abu Dhabi. On this episode, we're hearing from Zine Ghebouli, an analyst and fellow on Algeria at the Arab Reform Initiative and the European Council on Foreign Relations, and Ghaya Ben Mbarek, the National's North Africa correspondent, who's been closely following the elections in her coverage. Zine and Ghaya, welcome. So first, look, Zine, can you just set the stage for us a little bit? Tell us a little bit about Algerian politics, recent Algerian political history, and how Mr. Tebboune came to power.
Sure. Thanks for having me first. And I think this election is critical and important in the sense that it represents the first test after the 2019 protest movement. But to understand the importance of this election, we have to go back to Algeria's recent political history. As you've said, the transfer of power usually in Algeria is after either a series of socio-political upheaval or a security upheaval as well. And in that sense, the establishment, as complicated as it is, plays a decisive role in choosing the president and in also endorsing his policies and the priorities for his term. In that sense, it is important to remember that Algeria is a freshly independent state. And as much as that would make people believe that things could get out of hand, as much as it is important to also remember that Algeria is not only living sort of a socio-political upheaval or general transformation since its independence in 1962, but it's also important to remember that Algeria lacks the tools that are essential usually in building or in maintaining a democratic transition or democratic rule in that sense. That's for one. Second, I think it also represents a test for the trajectory that has been chosen by the establishment since the protest movement in 2019. And this trajectory is not new when it comes to politics in Algeria. I think when we look at the history of the country throughout the past 60 years, especially since the independence in 1962, we noticed that every single time that there was a social upheaval or political upheaval or any sort of security issue or security challenges, the vision or the priority of the establishment of the actors that constitute the leadership in Algeria has always been focused on maintaining stability at the expense of any unwanted or any risky social or political reforms in that sense, or even economic reforms.
So Zine, tell us some more about the specifics of the Hirak movement. Was it just a kind of general sweeping anti-establishment movement, or were there specific demands made in 2019? And have any of those demands been met in the past 5 years?
First, I think it's always good to remember that the Hirak upheaval or the Hirak protest movements came within the context of a greater regional dynamic that has sought change since 2011. And it's also important to remember that it came within the context of an absent president, Abdelaali Bouteflika. Those who are unaware of the situation back in 2019, it was 5 or 6, 7 years after Bouteflika had his major illness issues and was absent from the political scene. So he was basically a paraded ghost. as most Algerians would like to refer to him today. And in that sense, I think the entire establishment was in a state of flux, or was in a state of transition, because first of lack of leadership, second, lack of vision about the priorities, third, the socio-economic and the severe regional upheavals and severe regional shifts that were happening while Algeria was basically out of the negotiation table, if I may say. And in that sense, I think the Hirak definitely started as a movement anti the fifth term bid of the former president Abdelaali Bouteflika. But the thing about politics in the region, especially in Algeria, usually socio-political and economic and basically democratic aspirations usually grow more rapidly than rulers would imagine. And in that sense, the aspirations of the Hirak, or the aspirations of those opposition actors who contributed to this political movement, grew significantly from just wanting Bouteflika out to wanting a radical reform or a radical change of the establishment. I think we could establish 2 or 3 main demands. First, a political reform process that would, again, push those who contributed to the misery or the dissatisfaction of Algerians out of the table. Second, socioeconomic reforms, because Algeria, as youthful as it can be, it suffers from major issues such as its dependence on the oil and gas industry, lack of employment opportunities, a very unsustainable economic system based on social welfare policies that often lead to a severe economic deficit and budget deficit. And third, there was also something that is often disregarded when some analysis is done on the Hirak, is the importance of regional perspective. Algeria, again, in 2019, was stuck in an environment that was fueled by civil conflict and also security instability across the Sahel, across Libya, some sort of semi-stability in Tunisia, but still that was also at risk of very severe social and political division, political polarization. So within that context, I think Algerians wanted a new trajectory, a new hope, a new vision for the country that is based on freedom, democratization, socioeconomic opportunities, and the regional influence. But I think one thing to remember is that a change is not a linear process. So Algeria has had its reforms, but it's also stuck in a very old social contract based on the revolutionary legitimacy, based on the importance of the oil and gas and the hydrocarbon sector. And when we are in that trajectory, usually in the region, we often disregard some other issues, whether it's human rights, whether the importance of rule of law and democratic reforms. But again, that's change is a very long process.
Raya, tell us a little bit about the opposition candidates, Youcef Aouchiche and Abdelaali Hassani Cherif. What do they stand for? Who are they? And second of all, what do the people think of them?
So these 2 candidates basically really represent 2 different schools of thought. Youcef Aouchiche, who is a representative of Social Forces Front, is definitely here considered the democratic opposition, secular representative. Aouchiche is an engineer, like academically speaking, an ex-journalist, and he is really considered a seasoned politician who started his activism back in school. He comes originally from Tizi Ouzou, the city in the Kabyle, predominantly Amazigh region, which many people think that gives him actually quite an advantage because he comes from a region that has 7 million people, something that observers really considered an asset, and these elections make him really a favorable contender, despite the fact that many people really see that President Tebboune as the most eligible candidate. So Youcef Aouchiche, he comes really in quite a coordination with the speech of his secular socialist party. He's built his campaign rhetoric actually quite similar to the other 2 candidates on the discourse of really fostering socio-economic justice, economic reforms that are, in a sense, it's the same that continue to support the welfare state. One other aspect that he's spoken about is the concept of decentralization. Since I said Youcef Aouchiche comes from the Kabyle region, which has long suffered and long really complained about some sort of marginalization from the power and decision-making process. As for Abdelaali Hassani Cherif, Cherif. He's the representative of another also known school of thought, which is the Islamist movement of society. He started also as a student activist from the 1990s, a period that is known in Algeria as the Black Decade, which in which Algeria has suffered from lots of terrorist attacks and targeting of its military, and also targeting actually of this Islamic party that has been establishing really discourse and the school of thought that it is really a moderate Islamist party. Actually, Abdelaali Hassani was not the most favorable candidate for his party. He was the second name that was brought up and was actually a surprise for his party to be nominated. Also in his discourse, it's mainly the focus has been also the economy, the economic reforms. He's spoken also about social justice, fair distribution of wealth, all really in coordination and harmony with the two other candidates' speech, and also the speech that the government and the regime. As you can see, there's some kind of balance between these three candidates. There isn't really, we cannot speak about true political competition in these elections. So in the 2019 elections, Tebboune won by a majority, but there was like practically maybe 40% of people that have participated also in the recent parliamentary election. I think it was maybe a little less. So overall, there are three schools of thoughts represented in these elections. We've got the official discourse represented by President Tebboune, who is running as an independent candidate. But President Tebboune, we need to bear in mind that he is known as a figure that he is backed by the military, something that is really not surprising whilst looking at Algeria's history. We've got the Islamist current and we've got the secular leftist current, but all of them, they have built their discourse during this electoral campaign on similar reasoning, also relating to foreign policy. All three of these candidates really agree on most questions regarding the situation in the Sahel and the North African region, especially in Libya. Questions also that is really important here to mention is Libya's role as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Libya has been trying really to forge an image that to make itself really seen as an active actor in the international scene, regionally, as well as has been really pushing to impose itself as a major actor both in the Maghreb region and in Africa. So all of this combined really it makes us look at the Algerian election as something really quite important and that needs following, even though the picture is obvious of regardless like the person who might be winning these elections, which is like the incumbent President Tebboune, but really there might be surprises in these elections, and regardless like of the results, it's really something's worth following.
Yeah, Zine, as Raya mentioned, I think a lot of people expect anyway that Tebboune will win the vote. But does that mean that having an opposition is not very useful in Algeria? Look, the opposition candidates, as Raya described them, there are some good ideas there, right? Sharing more wealth, diversifying the economy, listening to the youth. Does the establishment see these opposition candidates and the level of support for them in these elections as maybe like a barometer for trends in the country that they can use to inform policy, even if Tebboune wins the next term?
I think the participation of the two candidates from the opposition is more about providing and ensuring diversity of political opinions in the elections rather than really following the trends of the population, because it is my conviction that the establishment usually does not need the opposition to understand the trends of the society. And they would even go beyond that, which is an unpopular opinion. I think the establishment understands the society better than the society would understand itself, because it is the establishment that actually crafted the society. It is the establishment that controls the trends of the society. It is the establishment that sets the priorities. And there is the establishment that sets the trajectory and the vision for the future, the strategic direction of Algeria for the future. However, at the same time, I think all of the establishment actors understood, whether they liked it or not, that if there are no opposition actors in this election, it would harm the voter turnout, it would harm the credibility of the election, which is already being contested by radical opposition actors. These elections are important, at least for the establishment, for two main reasons. First, when it comes to the voter turnout, considering the overall regional circumstances and this overall discourse of Algeria being attacked, Algeria under threat, which is a rhetoric that has been really characterizing the Algerian domestic political situation since 1962, but it has been really predominantly present in the speeches since the arrival of the new president Abdelmadjid to power. So in that sense, I think unless there is a really good voter turnout that would surpass the voter turnout back in, which you mentioned earlier in the session, back in 2019, there will be some very critical questions on the trajectory that the establishment has chosen since 2019, which is to avoid any deep dialogue initiatives or any deep reforms as requested by some of the opposition polls, and to go with its own trajectory and roadmap for political reforms and the socio-economic reforms in general. Second, I think these elections are also important in the sense that because of the overall rhetoric of the current leadership, and because of this perception by the establishment actors in general that Algeria is indeed under attack and that Algeria needs to defend itself and needs to play, as Raya said, a very important role regionally and internationally when it comes to the balance of powers, when it comes to this shift in regional geopolitical order, whether regionally or internationally. Any president that needs to lead the country for the next 5 years would essentially require support from the population. However, I think when it comes to the trends in general, what we've seen from the three different candidates is an agreement or a consensus on two major issues or on two major priorities. For the socioeconomic reforms when it comes to economic diversification, social welfare policies, and maintaining social justice and social stability. And second is the role of Algeria regionally and internationally. And again, whether it comes to questions like Western Sahara, Palestine, the Sahel, there is a consensus that Algeria needs to do something. But the difference between candidates is about how does Algeria do something, not really about the vision, but rather about the trajectory or the tools to reach that vision.
Raya, I want to pick up on something Zine said. He expressed his admittedly controversial opinion that it's the establishment that actually crafts the direction and vision of the people. But how does that square with what we saw in 2019 with the Hirak movement, with this mass popular protest movement? And what does that mean for the youth's voice, not only in this election, but also going forward? Do young people in Algeria take a different view from the establishment, and will that influence the direction of politics in the future?
There is definitely, to a certain extent, some influence by the establishment on the general public opinion in Algeria. But we can see since 2019 that the fact that something that has been building up is this satisfaction of this not sustainable status quo, not sustainable political discourse by the establishment, but something that really does not match the aspiration of this new generation. So I've spoken with some people that are really dissatisfied with all the components of this government. It's definitely maybe a portion of the population, but lots of people really believe that there is only one person and one part of the system and the regime that is ruling, which is the executive. People are very sure that these institutions are really just a puppet that the regime uses in order to make this better picture that here we are, we're trying really to involve people. This opinion, as controversial it might be, it is true to a certain extent, and it is seen. And the good thing with Algerians, and despite maybe this kind of restrictions that people are facing, is that Algerians do speak politics on the ground. They do express their own dissatisfaction, and they do really express their aspiration for change. But like many other countries that have gone through the period of uprising since 2011, through this they had this aspiration throughout the region that had this domino effect of wanting change. People have lost hope because they've been trying for a long time, and they've lost hope in all the political class. And the thing is, there is quite an influence by other neighboring countries, especially Tunisia. Like Tunisia and Algeria are known as the population are as one population. Lots of the things in Tunisia have been influencing what's happening in Algeria, even this sense of political apathy that's been really growing in the region. The opinion that the establishment might be influencing the general public opinion, it is true to a certain extent, but I would not describe it as the general truth in the Algerian community.
And my last question, Raya, for you is, you're covering this election for us at The National. A lot of people say it's a foregone conclusion. And even if that's true, and I'll put this to both of you, do you expect there to be any surprises in this election? Is there anything that you could see happening that might make you stand back and say, oh, that was not so predictable?
I always really want to give the benefit of the doubt, but I'll really have to agree with what Algerians are saying and what Algerian experts are saying is that there would be no surprises. And actually, surprisingly, this is the same thing that is happening. We're hoping to see definitely some change in the region, especially in Algeria's role currently is more important than ever. Its role as a member of the Security Council, the Gaza war is very important. So anything that happens domestically is definitely going to impact its status within the international community and within the international institution that is part of.
And Zine, any surprises that you think could happen in this election?
There's a general idea when it comes to elections in Algeria. The incumbent president usually does not run for a second term unless he or she, and in Algeria's case, he is almost sure of winning the elections. But again, it's not really about any electoral fraud as much as it is about my conviction that the current president is, despite some popular opinion from the opposition actors, is popular because of his social welfare policies, is also really speaks the language of the streets, language of the population, in the sense when it comes to the sovereigntist approach, whether when it comes to the social welfare policies, Algeria's role in the region. And I'm not saying whether this approach or these policies are right or wrong necessarily. There could be a lot of critique regarding the trajectory that has been chosen since 2019. But again, reality is reality. And I think amongst the current pool of candidates, the current president has the majority of chances of winning a second term. Algerians did know what they did not want in 2019, which is nepotism, which is socio-economic upheaval, which is socio-economic challenges, lack of opportunities, lack of democratic reforms. And they had a general idea about what they wanted, which is a new country, new trajectory, new vision, state rule of law, democratization, socio-economic opportunities, regional influence. But at the same time, they had absolutely no idea, including the opposition actors, about how to get there. And because nature is afraid of vacuum, because in politics you cannot really have a vacuum, again, the establishment took control of the situation. It knew that there is a dissatisfaction, but at the same time, in a very, let's say, politically Machiavellic way, it understood that unless there is a serious effort from the opposition actors to unify themselves, there is no other actor that could replace the system within the near future. One very final thought, changing this trajectory of Algeria requires a general consensus that includes concessions from the society and the opposition actors and the establishment itself. And I'm not sure we're there yet. I think Algerians still need time to reach that consensus.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Suleiman. Thank you to the whole team.
Thank you both. It was a pleasure to join.
That's it for today at the Year of Elections. Thanks a lot for listening. Please follow and subscribe to get all the latest episodes as soon as they come out, and head to thenationalnews.com to stay up to date with all the latest from the region. This episode was produced by Yasmin Ataji, Doa Farid, Arthur Edison, and I'm your host, Suleiman Hakimi.